What happens when two people, used to being connected to everything, are suddenly left connected only to each other? Amanda and David Marshall are about to find out. Fresh off dropping their only daughter at college, the new empty nesters decide to treat themselves to a romantic, reconnecting getaway at a secluded, picturesque cabin. But the Whispering Pines is missing one crucial amenity. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no connection to the outside world. For Amanda, a project manager who lives and breathes email, and David, a programmer whose escape is tech forums, the silence is terrifying at first. Boredom quickly turns to panic. Stuck with a 1,000-piece puzzle, mostly beige, a stack of 90s-era novels, and each other's reluctant company, they're forced to confront the one connection they've long forgotten, their own. With help from the owner of the only local general store and her rotary phone, a surprise storm, and a lot of terrible coffee, Amanda and David must discover if they have anything left to say to each other when there isn't a screen in the way. The Whispering Pines is a warm, witty, and gentle novella, perfect for curling up with. It's a reminder that sometimes getting disconnected is the only way to truly find each other. Chapter 1. The Whispering Pines. The crunch of tires on gravel was the only sound to break the silence of the October woods. Their silver-gray Audi Q5 had spent the last 15 minutes on what was politely called a road. In reality, it was two faded ruts cutting through a brilliant sea of red and gold maple leaves, a sight that should have been inspiring, but right now only made Amanda Marshall feel isolated. "Damn it," Amanda muttered, her thumb swiping uselessly at the screen of her iPhone 14 Pro. She was trying to send one last email, just a schedule confirmation for the Alara project. A simple, "Received, will review next week. Thanks." That was it. But the little loading icon just spun and failed. She held the phone up toward the sunroof in a hopeless, instinctual gesture, as if that might summon a magical bar of 5G from the gray Ontario sky. "What are you trying to do, Amanda?" David asked, his voice even, eyes fixed on the rutted path. He'd turned off NPR 20 miles back when the static finally overpowered the host. Now the only thing filling the cabin was the low growl of the engine and the tink-tink-tink of gravel hitting the undercarriage. "You promised you'd unplug," he added. "I am unplugged," she said, her voice sharp. "This is the last email, just a confirmation for Patterson. It'll take 3 seconds. If your damn map hadn't led us into the literal wilderness—" "My map?" David gave a dry, tired laugh they both knew too well. "This was the Google Maps address you pinned, and the wilderness is the whole point, remember? A quiet place to reconnect, you said, right after we dropped Emily at her dorm." Amanda didn't answer. She knew he was right. She was the one who'd found this cabin on some luxury travel blog advertised as the perfect empty nester's hideaway. After their only daughter, Emily, had left for college 6 weeks ago, their suburban Chicago home had become unbearably quiet. That silence, combined with the fourth-quarter crunch at her project management firm, had sent her searching for an escape. The problem was, her version of escape had always included good wine, a roaring fireplace, and a strong enough Wi-Fi signal to just check in on work emails. She called it balance. David called it a digital leash. David gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was 49, a year older than Amanda, and his senior programmer job had almost been fully remote for years. He was the one used to disconnecting by diving into vintage guitar forums or rewatching old basketball games. He'd actually been looking forward to this. He downloaded a 90s grunge playlist, ready to reminisce about their college days. But now, the tense quiet in the car just felt like a frozen Zoom call. The road suddenly turned, and the forest opened up. "There it is," David said, his voice thick with relief. The Whispering Pines came into view, and even Amanda had to suck in a breath. It was better than the pictures. A real, solid, honey-colored cedar log cabin, not some cheap kit home. A sturdy riverstone chimney rose from the roof, and a wide porch, complete with 2 wooden Adirondack chairs, looked out over a small, glassy lake that perfectly mirrored the fiery yellow birches on its shore. They parked on the fresh gravel. David killed the engine. The silence rushed in. It wasn't the suffocating quiet from the car. This was a deep, rich silence. The distant tap-tap-tap of a woodpecker, the rustle of leaves in a light breeze, the gentle lap of water against the shore. The air was cold, crisp, and smelled of pine, damp earth, and the faint sweet scent of wood smoke from somewhere. Oh, Amanda breathed, her work frustration melting away for a second. It really is beautiful, David. Told you, he smiled, his first real one in hours. They got out, stretching. David went to the back to get the luggage, while Amanda walked up the wooden steps. The key was just where the instructions said, under a cute turtle-shaped rock by the welcome mat. She turned it in the lock. The heavy wooden door swung open with a soft, welcoming creak. The inside was instantly cozy, all wood and stone. A plush, moss-green sofa faced a massive stone fireplace. A worn but clean Persian rug covered the pine floors. And a compact kitchen was surprisingly modern, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The smell of cedar and faint, lemony polish hung in the air. "Wow," David said, hauling 2 large suitcases over the threshold. "This place is great. Look at that fireplace." "And look at the kitchen," Amanda said, running a finger over the cool stone. "They even have a French press. Maybe this week will be okay after all." She felt her shoulders unclench. This could be a good week. She'd build a fire. She'd read that Michelle Obama book she'd bought 6 months ago. She would... "Okay, first things first," Amanda said, dropping her purse on the counter. She patted her jeans pocket out of habit. "Where do you see the Wi-Fi password? I need to do a quick check, just to make sure Patterson hasn't burned the office down." David shrugged. "Probably on the fridge." Amanda walked to the stainless steel refrigerator. No piece of paper. Just a moose-shaped magnet staring at her with blank eyes. Not here." She scanned the room. Must be in the welcome binder. On the oak coffee table sat a thick leather-bound binder embossed with "Welcome to the Whispering Pines." Amanda flipped it open. Page 1 was a handwritten welcome note. Page 2, emergency numbers, police, fire, cabin manager. Page 3, fireplace instructions. Page 4, directions for the outdoor hot tub. Amanda flipped faster. Checkout procedures, local restaurants, hiking trails, boat rentals. She hit the last page. Nothing. "It's not here," she said, her voice losing its relaxed edge. "Nothing?" asked David, fiddling with the porch light switch. "The Wi-Fi password. It's not in the binder." "Weird." David, still calm, pulled out his Samsung. "Let me try to get a signal. I just want to check the Bears' score." He stepped out onto the porch, holding his phone up. Amanda watched him through the sliding glass door. She saw him frown. He walked down the steps, out toward the edge of the water. Then he turned, shaking his head. "Nothing," he said, stepping back inside, brushing a leaf off his jacket. "Not a single bar. Must be because we're in a valley. It'll come back when we drive up the hill." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "What do you mean, nothing? Like no 5G or nothing, nothing?" Nothing, David confirmed. "It just says emergency calls only." Okay, don't panic, Amanda," she said to herself. "That just means the Wi-Fi is even more important." She began a systematic search. She looked behind the TV. She checked the desk drawers. Finally, she found it. Tucked on a small table by the sofa, hidden behind a lamp, was the Wi-Fi router. A small green light was blinking steadily. It was on. "Ah!" she cried. She picked it up. The network name was printed on the bottom, Whispering Pines _guest. but there was no password. "David, it's asking for a password," she said, her voice tight. "Try password," he suggested. She typed PASSWORD. Connection failed. "Try 1234567 8. No. Try Whispering Pines. No. Whispering Pines 123. No! Amanda practically shouted. "Why would they make it so complicated?" "Calm down, Amanda," David noticed, the real panic in her voice. "Just call the manager. Their number's in the book." "Good idea." Amanda grabbed the binder, flipping to the emergency page. Cabin manager, Bob. "Great." She picked up her iPhone, dialed Bob's number, and of course, nothing happened. The screen just flashed, "Call failed." She stared at the phone that was her entire universe. It was her work, her schedule, her connection to her daughter, her audiobooks, her meditation app. "I can't call," she said, her voice small. David tried on his. Same result. They just stood there, in the beautiful, cozy, expensive cabin. The smell of pines suddenly seemed suffocating. The silence of the woods was no longer peaceful. It was ominous. "No," Amanda said, shaking her head. "That's not possible. I'm sure the listing said free Wi-Fi. Do you remember? I specifically filtered for Wi-Fi." David ran a hand through his thinning hair. I think so. I remember you saying that." Amanda took a deep project manager breath. "Okay, we're obviously in a dead zone. And this router," she tapped the plastic box, "has to be connected to something, probably satellite. They wouldn't just not leave the password. It has to be somewhere." She started a second, more thorough search. She opened every kitchen drawer. She looked under the sink. She checked the bedroom closets. Meanwhile, David, now feeling a little uneasy himself, started rereading the welcome binder, this time word for word. 10 minutes later, they met back in the living room. Amanda shook her head, defeated. "David, I'm not kidding. I think there isn't one." David looked up from the binder, a look of dazed confusion on his face. "You're right. There isn't. But I think I found out why." He held the binder out to her, pointing to a small paragraph on the very first page, right below the handwritten welcome. It was written in a smaller, script-like font. "Welcome to the Whispering Pines. We hope you enjoy the peace of nature. To help you truly unplug and reconnect with what's important, this cabin has been designed as a digital-free sanctuary. There is no Wi-Fi, and cell service is virtually non-existent. Instead, we invite you to explore our library of books, try your hand at our board game collection, or simply listen to the Whispering Pines." Amanda read the paragraph once, then a second time. "Unplug?" she whispered, the words sounding like a curse. "Digital-free sanctuary?" She looked at David, who wore an expression that was half stunned, half amused. "They're kidding, right?" Amanda asked. "Is this some kind of Canadian joke? Sorry for the inconvenience. Password is on the next page." David turned the page. The next page was the fireplace instructions. Amanda's arm dropped to her side. Her $1,200 iPhone was now just a useless brick of glass and metal. Patterson's contract, the Alara project schedule, the family group chat, all of it locked away behind a silent wall of pine trees and stone. "A week," she said, her voice faint. "We're here for a week. No Wi-Fi, no phones." David cleared his throat. "Hey, look on the bright side. At least they have a French press." Amanda didn't laugh. She walked to the sliding glass door, looking out at the lake, which was just beginning to reflect the pale pink of the sunset.
It was beautiful, it was peaceful, and she had never felt so panicked in her entire life. Chapter 2. The Silent Dinner. A minute passed. Then 2. Amanda remained frozen by the sliding glass door, staring at her own reflection against the darkening lake. She could feel the pulse in her temples. Digital-free sanctuary? The phrase sounded so smug, so arrogant, as if the owner of this cabin, this mysterious Bob, was judging her entire way of life. "Well," David finally said, breaking the heavy silence. He placed the leather binder back on the coffee table with a soft thud. This is something." "Something?" Amanda spun around, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "David, this is a catastrophe. Patterson is going to think I'm dead. There will be 50 urgent emails by Monday morning. The entire Asia team won't get their responses. And, oh God, Emily, she'll text us. She'll think something terrible has happened." David held up his hands in a calming gesture. Hey, Emily knows we're going somewhere remote. She'll be fine. And your work, you deserve a break. Patterson can manage." "I don't get paid to manage," Amanda seethed, beginning to pace the pine floor. "I get paid to manage, to be in control, and right now I can't control anything." She gestured wildly at her useless iPhone. "I can't even check the weather."
David sighed. He walked over to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. They were rigid as stone beneath her cashmere sweater. "Amanda, breathe. How long have we been here? 30 minutes? It's not the end of the world. It's an inconvenience. A major one, I grant you. But we'll figure it out." "How?" she challenged. "Are you going to climb that pine tree to get a signal? Use 2 cans and a string?" "No, I'm going to," David said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Open that bottle of Merlot we brought, and I'm going to heat up that amazing lasagna you made." Amanda stared at him, the panic inside her warring with the bone-deep exhaustion from the drive. He didn't get it. To him, this was an authentic vacation. To her, it was a cage. But she also knew that look of his. It was his, "Please don't let this turn into a fight" look. After 24 years, she could read it perfectly. She took a deep breath, the scent of cedar and cold air filling her lungs. "Fine," she said, her voice still shaky. "Wine. Wine is a good idea." David smiled, visibly relieved. "Great. You open the wine, I'll handle the lasagna." For the next 15 minutes, the cabin filled with the sounds of a couple in motion, the metallic click of the corkscrew, the satisfying pop of the cork, the glug of dark red wine pouring into glasses. David turned on the oven. The tick-tick-tick of the gas igniter and the soft whoosh of the flames seemed abnormally loud in the quiet. He opened the fridge, its cold white light spilling onto the floor, and pulled out the foil-wrapped tray of lasagna. Normally, this ritual would be buffered by music. David would have his indie folk playlist on Spotify, or Amanda would have a true crime podcast on while she made a salad. Tonight, there was only the rip of aluminum foil, the clink of a wine glass on the granite countertop, the opening of a cabinet for plates. Every sound felt stark and isolated. "Do you want me to start the fire?" David asked, his voice too loud. "It's not that cold yet. Let's let the oven warm up the kitchen." "Right." Another 5 minutes of silence. Amanda leaned against the counter, sipping her wine. The dry tannin and dark fruit soothed her throat, but not her racing brain. She was already cycling through her mental email list. Must get back to Susan about the budget projection. Need to check in with the design team. Have to confirm my one-on-one with Mark. And then she realized. She didn't have to remember. There was no way for her to act on any of it. She was powerless. A strange, numb feeling began to creep up the back of her neck. "You know," David said, breaking her train of thought. He was leaning against the opposite counter, also sipping his wine. I bet that router is connected, but it's not Wi-Fi. It's a phone line. I bet this Bob guy has a landline in here. Amanda rolled her eyes. A landline. Great. Like it's 1995. Should we check for a fax machine, too? No, seriously, David insisted. For emergencies. There has to be one. It's in here somewhere, probably locked in a closet. Then what good is it? Amanda said, the irritation returning. She didn't want the false hope. Just a thought, David shrugged. The oven timer beeped, a jarring electronic sound. The lasagna was ready. They set the dining table, a heavy, solid oak table, in a small nook overlooking the lake. David lit a few candles he'd found in a drawer, clearly trying to create a romantic atmosphere. Amanda just felt like they were in a B-horror movie right before the generator fails. They sat. The cheesy lasagna was steaming, and their wine glowed in the candlelight. It was a perfect scene. An Instagram-perfect photo, if she could have posted one. David dug in with a large bite. "Amazing, Am," he said after swallowing. "Good as always." "Thanks." They ate. The silence settled over them. There was no TV, no phone to scroll, no kid to ask about their day. Just the two of them and the sound of their forks scraping lightly against the ceramic plates. Amanda realized, with a small jolt, that she couldn't remember the last time they'd eaten dinner like this, completely undistracted, just her and him. And it was horribly awkward. They had been together for nearly their entire adult lives. They knew all of each other's stories. They'd weathered the biggest ups and downs, the birth of their child, job losses, aging parents. And yet now, with no modern noise to fill the space, they seemed to have very little to say. "Gets, dark fast out here," David tried, motioning to the now pitch-black window. "Yep," Amanda replied. "It's October." Another pause. Chewing. Swallowing. "Did you talk to your mom this week?" David asked. "Tuesday. Same old. She thinks the mailman is stealing her magazines." David gave a short laugh. "Classic." The pause. Amanda looked down at her plate. The cheese was starting to congeal. She felt an intense, almost unbearable itch to check her phone, just to scan a headline, just to see a dumb Facebook post. Anything. She even glanced at its dark screen on the counter, as if it might magically spring to life. David was feeling it too. He was pushing a piece of pasta around his plate with his fork. Normally at this hour, he'd be eating while reading tech reviews on his laptop or arguing with strangers on Reddit about the Bears' defense. Now he just had his lasagna and his wife. "You know," he said, setting his fork down, I think this is good for us. I really do." Amanda looked up. "Good? David, I'm on the verge of a full-blown panic attack." "No, I'm serious. Listen," he signaled. Amanda listened. At first she heard nothing. Then she did. A low hum. "What is that?" "The refrigerator," he smiled. "I'm listening to the refrigerator. Do you know the last time I actually heard a refrigerator? And listen, outside." Amanda focused. Beyond the silence, she could hear it. A deep, distant whoo, whoo. "An owl?" she whispered. "Maybe. And that scratching. Probably a small animal on the porch?" "Or a serial killer," Amanda said flatly. David laughed, a real laugh this time. "You've been listening to too many true crime podcasts. Come on, Em. It's peaceful. We paid a lot of money for this sanctuary. The least we can do is try."
Amanda looked at her husband. He looked tired in the candlelight. There were more lines around his eyes than she remembered, and more silver in his hair. He'd been trying so hard these last few months, with Emily leaving. Maybe he was right. Maybe she could try.
All right, she sighed, taking another sip of wine. Well, try. So, what do unplugged people do at night? David beamed, as if she'd just agreed to something monumental. I'm so glad you asked. Dinner ended. They cleared the dishes together, another task usually done in silence or a rush. Tonight, it was slow. David washed, Amanda dried. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with an easy, practiced dance honed over decades. Done, David said, hanging up the dish towel. Amanda looked at the clock. The only one working was the analog one on the microwave. It read 7:15 p.m. A fresh wave of despair hit her. It's only 7:15? It feels like midnight. I know, David said, his voice cheerful. And this is where the magic happens. He walked over to a large pine cabinet in the corner of the living room. One Amanda had assumed held linens. He swung it open. It wasn't linens. It was a library. Hundreds of old, mismatched paperbacks. And on the bottom, a stack of board games. Take your pick, David said with a grand gesture. Amanda stepped closer. The smell of old paper and dust wafted out. She ran her eyes over the spines. It was a graveyard of 90s authors. John Grisham, Tom Clancy, Danielle Steele, Mary Higgins Clark. The books her parents used to read. Below them were the games. Monopoly, Clue, Scrabble, Trivial Pursuit, the 1986 edition, and on top, a 1,000-piece puzzle of golden retriever puppies asleep in a basket. Oh my God, Amanda said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. This is my childhood. Exactly, David said, energized. He pulled out the Scrabble box. This one? You and me, just like in college. Amanda looked at the Scrabble box. She remembered long nights in their dorm, drinking cheap beer and arguing over whether QI was a word. How long ago was that? 25 years? I don't know, David. Come on, what's the alternative? Staring at each other until we turn to stone? He had a point. All right, she said, taking the box. But I'm warning you, I'm going to crush you. We'll see about that, David grinned. They cleared the coffee table. David built a fire in the fireplace, and this time Amanda didn't object. The crackle of the wood and the warm orange glow filled the room, chasing away the gloom. They unfolded the board. David dumped the wooden tiles out, the sound of them clattering on the table surprisingly familiar. They drew for first. David got an A. Amanda got an R. You're up, he said, pushing the bag toward her. Amanda put her hand into the worn velvet bag, feeling the smooth wooden squares. She drew her 7 letters and placed them on her rack. I-N-E-T-V-R-A. She stared at the letters. Her project manager brain instantly began to arrange them. Rivet. Train. Vein. She placed the tiles. R-I-V-E-T. 10 points, she declared. David nodded, drawing his own letters. For the next hour they played. They focused. They argued playfully over whether ZEP, a slang term, was allowed. It wasn't in the battered old Webster's dictionary that came with the game. David used the Q and the Z. Amanda made a 7-letter word, invader, and nearly bounced in her seat. The fire crackled. The owl was still hooting outside. When the game ended, David had won by a narrow margin. Rematch, Amanda demanded immediately, and she actually meant it. Tomorrow, David said, stretching and yawning. Do you know what time it is? Amanda glanced at the microwave clock. 9:30 p.m. Oh, she said, surprised. The time actually passed.
They cleaned up the game. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It had been filled by the pop of the fire, the clack of the tiles, and their own laughter. They got ready for bed. Amanda washed her face in the bathroom using the provided pine-scented soap. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who looked less stressed than she had 3 hours ago. She went back to the bedroom. David was already in bed, reading a battered John Grisham novel he'd pulled from the cabinet. The light from the bedside lamp cast a warm glow on his face. Amanda climbed in. The duvet was heavy and warm. She reached out instinctively, fumbling on the nightstand for her phone to plug it in. And, of course, it wasn't there. She'd left it, useless, on the kitchen counter.
A small, tight spasm of anxiety returned. Patterson. Emily. The news. The world was still spinning out there without her. "You okay?" David asked, looking up from his book. I think so," she answered honestly. "It's just weird. It feels like a phantom limb. I keep reaching for something that isn't there." "I know," he said. "I've mentally checked the Bears' score 3 times. He set his book down. "But you know what? Maybe this is exactly what we needed. 1 week, just us, nothing in between." He turned off the light. The darkness filled the room. This time, it wasn't scary. It was deep. Amanda could hear David's steady breathing beside her. She could hear the fire crackling as it died down in the living room. She lay on her back, staring up at a ceiling she couldn't see. Her brain was still running, but slower. Instead of projects and emails, she was thinking about Scrabble words. Why didn't I see vintner? Amanda Marshall, the woman who couldn't sleep without 30 minutes of Instagram scrolling at a white noise app, closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, in the total, absolute silence of the Canadian woods, she began to fall asleep. Chapter 3. The Last General Store. Amanda woke up, and it wasn't to an alarm. There was no jarring vibrate of her iPhone on the nightstand, no familiar beep, beep, beep of her backup alarm, no artificial blue light piercing her eyelids, signaling that it was 6:15 a.m. and the world was demanding her attention. She woke up to something far more alien. Silence. It was a deep, heavy quiet, broken only by David's even breathing beside her and the high, trilling song of a bird somewhere very close. Amanda opened her eyes. The room was full of morning light, a soft, pearly gray filtering through the window blinds. She felt strange. She felt awake. Her body wasn't heavy with its usual fatigue. Her neck didn't ache from hunching over her phone in bed last night. She lay still, savoring the unfamiliar sensation for a moment. She had slept, really slept, deeply and dreamlessly. And then, like a bucket of ice water, reality hit. No phone, no Wi-Fi, no contact. Yesterday's panic returned, rising in her chest. She sat bolt upright, the heavy duvet sliding off her. David mumbled in his sleep, but didn't wake. What time was it? She glanced at her left wrist, where her Apple Watch usually was. But she'd left it at home on its charger. She hadn't worn a dumb watch in years. She padded out of the bedroom, her bare feet cold on the wood floor. The microwave clock. 8:17 a.m. 8:17! She never ever slept past 6:30, not even on weekends. She'd wasted 2 hours. 2 hours she could have been doing what? She didn't even know what she could be doing. Her iPhone lay on the counter, a dead black rectangle. The addict's urge to pick it up was overwhelming. She hit the power button. The screen lit up. Still the same no service. She felt that familiar itch at the back of her neck, the phantom limb she'd told David about. She wanted to check her email so badly it was a physical ache. Patterson would have sent her at least 5 by now. Emily might have texted her after class last night. The world was moving on without her. The feeling of powerlessness was dizzying. Morning. a sleepy voice said from behind her.
Amanda jumped. David was standing in the bedroom doorway, rubbing his eyes. He was wearing an old Pearl Jam t-shirt and sweatpants. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the useless phone as if it were evidence in a crime. "Still nothing, and it's 8:15. We overslept." David looked at the microwave, then at Amanda, then back at the microwave. A slow smile spread across his face. Overslept? Or just slept? Don't get philosophical on me, David. I'm serious. This is insane. "You know what's insane?" he said, walking into the kitchen. "I don't feel like a zombie. And I think we still have some coffee." Coffee. The word was an instant balm to Amanda's frayed nervous system. Coffee. Coffee was civilization. Coffee was routine. Coffee was normal. She could handle no internet. She wasn't sure she could handle no caffeine. Coffee. Yes, coffee, she repeated, clinging to the word. David grabbed the sleek brown paper bag they'd bought from a roaster in Chicago. Dark matter, Columbia, single origin. David was a snob about his coffee. He unfolded the tin tie and looked inside. He frowned. "What?" Amanda asked, her panic immediately snapping back. I thought—" David turned the bag upside down over the counter. A pathetic little sprinkle of beans clattered onto the granite, enough for maybe 1 cup, 1 weak cup. "No," Amanda whispered. I thought you packed the big bag," David said, staring at her, his morning good humor vanishing. "Me? I packed the food. You were on coffee. I saw you put it by the coffee maker." "This was the bag. I thought it was full." David carefully scraped the precious beans into a small pile. "Well, this is all we have." They looked at each other. The lack of internet was an abstract disaster. The lack of coffee was a tangible, immediate crisis. "No," Amanda said, her voice firm. "No, absolutely not. I'd rather drink mud." David opened the cabinet above the coffee maker. Well, maybe the owners left some. He rooted around behind some herbal tea boxes. Aha! He pulled out a small, dusty foil packet. Folgers Instant Coffee. The expiration date was faintly stamped in the corner. October 2011. "We're not that desperate," David said, quickly putting it back. "Okay, Plan B." "What's Plan B? Chewing on pine needles?" "The binder!" David crowed. He grabbed the leather binder from the coffee table. "I was reading it last night. Local dining and amenities. Here, it's June's General Store and Bait. Only a 15-minute drive from the cabin. They sell essentials." Amanda felt a spark of hope. A store. A store meant people. It meant supplies. And maybe, dear God, maybe it meant Wi-Fi. "Go," Amanda said, already shrugging into her jacket. "We're going right now." 15 minutes later, their Audi Q5 was once again crunching down the dirt road, but this time with a clear purpose. Amanda sat in the passenger seat, leaning forward slightly, as if that would make the car go faster. She was scanning the woods not for their beauty, but for the sign of a cell tower. Nothing. "There it is," David said, pointing. They turned onto a cracked asphalt road and saw it. June's General Store sat at a crossroads, a peeling white plank building that was probably built in the 1950s and hadn't changed since. A rickety porch ran along the front, holding 2 rocking chairs and an ancient, seemingly defunct Coca-Cola machine. A rusty tin sign swung in the breeze. June's. Coffee, bait, essentials, gas. David parked next to a single rusty blue Ford F-150. A small brass bell jingled as they pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust, stale coffee, and something fishy that Amanda assumed was the bait. It was cramped and dim. Wide plank floors creaked under their feet. The shelves were chaotically stocked with everything. Motor oil next to breakfast cereal, fishing rods leaning against a cooler of milk, and a wall of potato chips next to thick coils of rope. Behind an old oak cash counter sat a woman,
She was 65, maybe 70, with stark white hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a pair of half-moon reading glasses low on her nose and a floral print apron. She was reading a tattered paperback and only looked up when the bells stopped jingling. She peered at them over her glasses. It was a look that wasn't judgmental, but wasn't exactly welcoming either. It was the look of someone who had seen it all. Amanda, buzzing with pent-up energy, made a beeline for the counter. "Good morning! Thank God you're here. We need 2 things, desperately. First, coffee. Whole bean. Do you have it?" The woman, June, slowly marked her page with an old receipt. "Aisle 1, she said, her voice a gravelly monotone. "Next to the cough syrup and the mousetraps. Our coffee's in a tan. No beans."
Canned coffee, like Folgers. Amanda tried not to wince. "Okay, canned coffee. Great." "And second," Amanda continued, leaning on the counter with the smile she used in board meetings, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but we're at the Whispering Pines cabin and there's no signal. Do you have Wi-Fi? What's the password? I just need 5 minutes. Seriously." June stared at Amanda over her glasses. A long beat of silence. The only hum was from the bait fridge in the corner. "The passwords? Try talking together, sweetie. All one word, no spaces. We don't have that here." Amanda's face fell. "Oh, right. Of course you don't." David, sensing the awkwardness, stepped forward, playing the friendly diplomat. "We'll just get that coffee, thanks." He gently tugged Amanda's sleeve. They walked to aisle 1. Sure enough, next to the Vicks Vaporub was a stack of blue Maxwell House coffee cans. David picked up a large one. "At least it's caffeine," he whispered. Amanda wasn't listening. She was scanning the store, desperate. She saw a spinning rack of postcards, faded photos of sunsets and moose. She saw a freezer case of popsicles. "June," Amanda called out, walking back to the counter. "So, there's just no internet in this town at all?" "Oh, we got internet," she said, the way she said the word making it sound like a disease. "Comes through the phone lines, slower than a turtle climbing a hill in winter. Good for checking the weather if you got a half hour to spare." She stopped wiping. "You two are at the Whispering Pines, aren't you?" David looked surprised. "Yeah, we are. How'd you know?" "Just a hunch," June said, going back to her rag. "You got that first day look, that, oh my God, the world is ending 'cause I can't check my Instagram." She said the word like it was a strange bug.
Amanda flushed. "It's not that. It's work. And my daughter." The shopkeeper paused. Her eyes softened. Just a fraction. "Work'll still be there. Daughter's probably fine. They usually are." She looked at the coffee can in David's hand. "Just this, then?" "And one of these," David said, grabbing a bag of beef jerky hanging near the counter. June nodded. She turned to a massive, beige, mechanical cash register that looked like it was from the Nixon administration. She punched the keys, and the cash drawer flew open with a loud ka-ching! $14.50, she said. David paid with cash. As he was getting his change, Amanda made one last attempt. She had spotted it. On the wall behind June, hidden by a firefighter calendar, was a phone. A beige, rotary, landline phone. "That phone," Amanda said, pointing. "Does it work?" "Most days," June said, putting the money in the drawer. Could I make one call to Chicago? I'll pay. I just need..." "Local only, sweetie," June cut her off, not unkindly. "Long distance costs a fortune. I don't have that set up. Besides," she said, nodding at the coffee can in David's hand, "looks like you already solved your real emergency." It was a dismissal. There was no more arguing. "Thanks, June," David said, stuffing the change in his pocket. They walked out of the store, the bell jingling behind them. The cold, crisp morning air hit their faces. The drive back to the cabin was silent. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the awkwardness of last night. This was the silence of resignation. Amanda clutched the can of Maxwell House to her chest like a failed consolation prize. She had tried. She had attempted to connect to the outside world, and the outside world, in the form of June, had gently but firmly refused her. They got back to the Whispering Pines. The cabin was just as quiet and welcoming. The lake glittered in the morning sun. Without a word, David took the coffee can. He opened it. The aroma was not the rich, dark-roasted berry notes of their Chicago roaster. It just smelled like coffee. And that was it. He filled the French press, using a little more than usual. He boiled the water. He poured. They waited 4 minutes. David poured 2 black mugs. They took them out onto the porch and sat in the 2 Adirondack chairs. Amanda took a sip. It was hot. It was strong. And it was pretty terrible. Bitter and slightly scorched. "Well," David said, taking a sip and wincing, "it's awful." "Yep," Amanda agreed. "It's hideous." She took another big gulp. She could feel the caffeine beginning to spread, chasing away the last remnants of panic. It wasn't an experience. It was a tool. And it was working. They sat there for a while, watching the lake. The woodpecker started up again, this time in a tree right next to the cabin. "She was right," Amanda finally said, her voice small. "About what? The coffee?" "About the first-day look." She let out a long, shaky sigh that seemed to release all the tension of the last 18 hours. "God, I'm such an addict." She chuckled. "Welcome to the first meeting. At least we have a sponsor." Amanda smiled. A real one. She looked down at her terrible coffee. "I guess so. We have coffee, we have a fireplace, and it's not raining." "And," David said, pushing himself out of the chair, "you owe me a Scrabble rematch. And this time, ZEP is definitely a word. I can feel it." Amanda looked out at the lake, the sun warming its surface. The itch to check her phone was still there, but it wasn't a screaming command anymore. It was just a whisper. "You're on," she said, draining her mug. "And by the way, QI was in the dictionary last night. I checked before we cleaned up."
Chapter 4. The 1,000-Piece Puzzle. The Scrabble rematch happened immediately after the first awful coffee. It was fueled by caffeine and something that felt a little like real, actual competition, something Amanda hadn't felt outside a boardroom in years. They played at the oak dining table, the morning light streaming in, highlighting the old scratches and rings on its surface. "No way!" David said, squinting at the 8 tiles Amanda had just laid down. "QUAINTS? That's not even a word!" "It is too a word," Amanda said, clapping her hands in triumph. "It means something odd or old-fashioned, and it's on a triple-word score, plus 50 points for using all 7 letters. That is 112 points. Yes, 112. Beat that." David stared at his nearly empty rack. He was left with a J and a V. He put down JAVA, scoring 14 points. "You win," he declared, pushing his tiles into the center of the board. "You used QI and quaints. You were hoarding the Q, weren't you?" "A good project manager always anticipates her resources," Amanda said with a smug smile. She felt a deep, satisfying rush, not like finishing a Gantt chart, but like a pure, simple victory. They cleaned up the wooden tiles, the clack-clack-clack of them falling into the worn velvet bag, oddly satisfying. Amanda reached for her mug, took another sip, and winced. Still terrible.
David nodded in agreement. Still terrible. And then the silence fell again. The Scrabble victory was over. The coffee was almost gone. Amanda glanced at the damn microwave clock. 10:47 a.m. Her euphoria evaporated. It was only 10:47 in the morning. They had been up for 2.5 hours, and she had already exhausted every structured leisure activity she could think of. The entire rest of the day stretched out before them, a vast, formless void. "So, what now?" Amanda said, her voice losing its confidence. David stood up and stretched, his old Pearl Jam shirt pulling tight. "Well, we could go for that hike. June mentioned the trails around the lake."
Amanda looked out the sliding glass door. The sky was no longer the clear blue it had been when they woke up. It had turned a uniform, milky gray. The clouds looked heavy and damp. "Looks like it's going to rain," she said. "I don't want to get caught out there in the rain with no phone to check the radar." "No hike, then," David agreed, not sounding particularly disappointed. "So we read." "It's 11 a.m., David," Amanda said, as if that explained everything. "I can't just sit and read all day." Her brain, trained for multitasking and crisis solving, was screaming for a task. David looked at her for a moment with an expression she knew well, a mix of affection and mild exasperation. "Amanda, you know what? You don't know how to be bored." "I do too," she protested. "I relax. I watch Netflix." "That's not being bored," he said. "That's curated distraction. I'm talking about real boredom, that 1980s rainy summer day boredom where you've got nothing to do but stare at a ceiling fan." "That sounds awful," Amanda said. "Exactly," David grinned. "And it's where the best ideas come from." He walked over to the game cabinet where they'd gotten the Scrabble last night. "Or, failing any ideas, we have this." He turned around, and in his hands was a large, faded, rectangular cardboard box. On the cover was a hazy, decidedly 90s-era photograph of pure chaos. "1,000 pieces of fun," the box proclaimed. "Puppies in a basket." Amanda took an involuntary step back. "Oh, no. David, no. Absolutely not." "Why not?" he asked, setting the box on the dining table with a thump. "It's 1,000 pieces. It's a project." "David, look at it," Amanda said, pointing at the picture. "It's a nightmare. It's a wicker basket filled with 7 golden retriever puppies. They're all the same color. Everything in the picture is beige. The basket is beige. The puppy fur is beige. The rug they're on is beige. This isn't a puzzle. It's a punishment." 1,000 pieces, David repeated, a glint in his eye. "It's a challenge." Before Amanda could protest further, he'd lifted the lid. A faint smell of old paper dust wafted out. And then, with a dramatic flourish, he turned the box upside down. A cardboard avalanche cascaded onto the oak table. The sound, a dry, rattling, 1,000-piece shh, made Amanda shudder. It was a mess. Chaos. Unorganized. It made the project manager in her want to scream. "All right," David said, rubbing his hands together. "Rule number 1, find the edge pieces." He started digging through the pile, flipping pieces over, looking for flat sides. Amanda stood there, arms crossed, watching her husband begin the most pointless task she had ever seen. She went to make another cup of Maxwell House. She stood leaning against the counter, sipping it, still terrible, and watching him. He was patient. He wasn't rushing. He was just flipping, examining, and making a small pile to his side of the edge pieces. He was humming some Nirvana tune. He was completely content. Amanda couldn't stand it. "You're doing it wrong," she blurted out. David looked up, surprised. "Wrong? How can it be wrong? I'm finding the edges." "You're being unsystematic," she said, marching over. Her coffee was abandoned on the counter. "You're just looking randomly. You should You should sort first. Sort? Yes, I see at least 4 different kinds of beige. There's wicker basket beige, fluffy fur beige, puppy nose beige, and rug beige, and the red from that blanket. We should make piles. David raised an eyebrow. That sounds intensive. It's efficient, Amanda insisted. She sat down in the chair opposite him. Fine, just for a minute, I'll help you sort. She began. She pulled a section of the pile toward her. Her hands flew through the pieces, fast and decisive. Basket, fur, eye, basket, red, fur. She made neat little piles around her. Outside, just as she'd predicted, it began to rain. Not a storm, but a steady, persistent drizzle that pattered against the roof and the windows. That sound, combined with the soft click-clack of the pieces as Amanda and David sorted, began to create a rhythm.
An hour passed. Lunch was forgotten. The coffee grew cold. "I found a corner piece," David announced, holding it up like a trophy. "Great," Amanda muttered, not looking up. She was focused on a particularly difficult section of beige fur. "This is definitely an ear. It has the right curve, but which dock does it belong to?" She glanced at the box lid, then back at her pile. "Wait, David, hand me that diagonal pattern edge piece you found earlier." "Which one?" "The one near your red pile." "No, the left. Yes, that one." He pushed it over. She picked it up. She picked up another piece from her own pile. She turned it. And then, click. The small, satisfying sound of 2 pieces of cardboard locking perfectly together. Amanda felt a tiny jolt of adrenaline. "Aha!" she said. "I knew it! This is the corner of the basket, right next to the red blanket." She set the 2 joined pieces down. Then she quickly found a third and a fourth that fit. The frame was beginning. David smiled, sitting back. "You're hooked?" "I am not hooked," Amanda lied, her eyes already scanning the pile for the next piece. "I'm just organizing the chaos." "Call it what you want," he chuckled. "You know, it's getting cold in here. I'm going to get the fire going." While Amanda, now completely sucked in, began to construct the entire bottom edge of the puzzle, David turned to a different analog task. He got old newspaper, which he'd found under the sink, kindling, and a few large logs from the porch. He followed the instructions in the binder. His first few attempts just produced smoke, making Amanda cough and wave her hand. "Are you trying to smoke us out?" she asked, not taking her eyes off a puppy nose piece she'd just found. "Hold on. It says there has to be airflow," David muttered. He rearranged the logs, creating a teepee structure. He lit the paper again. This time the paper caught, the flames licked up to the kindling, and finally a large log caught with a satisfying crack. A real warmth, and not just from the fireplace, began to spread through the room. The orange light danced on the pine walls, and the smell of cedar smoke hung in the air. The sound of the rain outside, the crackle of the fire inside, and the steady, clicking rustle of 2 adults focused on a pile of beige cardboard. 3 hours later, the entire border was complete. They had assembled the red blanket and were beginning the hard work of distinguishing 7 identical puppies. David yawned and stretched. "You know," he said, "I'm hungry. I think we forgot to eat lunch." Amanda looked up, her eyes blurry with focus. She looked at the clock. 4:15 p.m. The entire afternoon had vanished. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Wow." She looked down at her hands, her fingers slightly sore from pressing the pieces. Her back ached a little. And her brain? Her brain was quiet. It wasn't worrying about Patterson. It wasn't worrying about email. It wasn't worrying about Emily. For the last 4 hours, its only concern was whether a piece of light yellow fur belonged to Spot or Buddy. "Grilled cheese sandwich?" David asked, getting up. "Sounds perfect," Amanda said, still staring at the puzzle. She picked up one last piece, one with half a glossy black eye, and slotted it into place. Click. She smiled. It was a tired, genuine smile. David stood in the kitchen getting out the butter and bread. He watched her for a moment. She was muttering to herself, "Okay, now we need to find the other ear," having completely forgotten him. He didn't say anything. He just turned, started making their early dinner, and listened to the rainfall.
Chapter 5. Old Recipes and Dusty Books. The sizzle of butter in the cast-iron pan was the only sound in the cabin, besides the steady rain outside the window and the crackle of the fire. Amanda had found a loaf of sourdough in the freezer, a small bonus from the previous owners, and David was carefully flipping 2 golden-brown grilled cheese sandwiches. The smell of melting cheddar and buttery toasted bread filled the small kitchen, a primal, comforting aroma. They didn't bother to clear the puzzle's chaos from the dining table. Instead, David set 2 plates on the coffee table in front of the fire. They sat cross-legged on the floor, leaning back against the sofa, their feet stretched toward the warmth. Amanda took a bite. The hot cheese stretched. The bread crunched. It was ridiculously simple, and it was the best thing she'd eaten in weeks. "My God," she said after swallowing, "that's so good." "I know, right?" David said, his voice full of pride. "The secret is low heat and way too much butter." They ate in a comfortable silence, a world away from the awkwardness of last night's lasagna dinner. Last night's dinner had been filled with the absence of phones. Tonight's was filled with the presence of the fire and the rain. "I can't believe we spent the entire afternoon just sorting dog fur," Amanda said, taking a sip of water. She couldn't face any more Maxwell House. "You say we, you mean you. You completely took over. I was just the logistics support for General Amanda's campaign." Amanda nudged him in the shoulder. "Oh, shut up. It's just, I didn't realize. It was like meditation, but with a clear objective." She looked over at the dining table, where the beige mess still waited. "We're finishing it tomorrow." David smiled. "You sound just like you do when you're planning a new project. Only this time, the deliverable is a litter of puppies." They finished eating. David cleared the plates, and while he washed them in the sink, a task that took all of 3 minutes, Amanda tossed another log on the fire. Sparks shot up, and the flames roared back to life. And then, there it was again, that moment. Dinner was done. Dishes were washed. The game was played, at least until tomorrow. Amanda looked at the clock, 5:30 p.m. The sun was completely gone behind the clouds. Outside, it was pitch black, broken only by the light spilling from their own windows. "Okay," she said, more to herself than to David. "Evening. A rainy autumn evening. What do people do on a rainy autumn evening?" "Well, as I recall from my childhood, we have a few options. We could tell ghost stories. We could play Which Hand Is It In? Or," he walked over to the cabinet of books and games, "we could read." Amanda looked at the bookshelf. The faded, worn spines looked alien. Reading. Not on a screen. Not an audiobook at 1.5x speed during her commute. Just reading. She got up and joined him. The smell of old paper, sweet and dusty, was strong. "Take your pick," David said. "We've got The Pelican Brief by John Grisham, a classic." "I think I saw the movie," Amanda said. "Or The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy. It's about 900 pages. Should last us till Friday." Amanda ran her finger along the spines. Mary Higgins Clark? Dean Koontz? Danielle Steele? My God, this is my mom's book club from 1993. "Exactly," David said, pulling out The Pelican Brief. "I'm taking this one.
I want to see if I remember who the bad guy is. Amanda kept searching. She pulled one out. The cover showed a woman running from a dark house in the rain. Before I Wake, by an author she'd never heard of. All right, she sighed. This one. It looks cheesy enough. They returned to their spots in front of the fire. David settled into the plush armchair, putting his feet up on the ottoman. Amanda curled up on the sofa, pulling a thick wool blanket up to her chin. They opened their books, and they read. For the next hour, the cabin fell into a new kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was filled with the persistent rain tapping against the glass, the crackle and pop of the pine in the fireplace, and the occasional soft rustle of a page being turned. Amanda, who normally couldn't get through 3 pages without an urgent pull to check her phone, found herself sucked in. The story was cliché. The heroine was an idiot, but it was simple. It had a beginning, a middle, and, she assumed, an end. Her mind didn't wander to her projects. It wandered to whether the handsome butler was the killer. She read 3 chapters. When she finally looked up, her neck stiffening, she saw David was completely lost. He was frowning at his book in concentration, his lips pursed. She watched him for a moment. How long had it been since she'd actually seen him read a paper book? He was always on his laptop, the screen casting a blue glow on his face. Now, in the warm orange light of the fire and the small table lamp, he looked younger, like the boys she'd met in the university library 25 years ago. "Is it good?" she asked softly. David startled, looking up. "Oh, yeah. I forgot how good Grisham is. Gripping." He marked his page with an old receipt he'd found in his pocket. "What about you? Who's the killer?" "I think it's the butler, but I'm only on chapter 3. She set the book face down on her chest. "Hey, David." "Yeah?" "Those forums you're always reading online, the guitar ones, what do you find there? I've never really gotten it." It was a genuine question. Normally she'd ask, "Are you looking at those guitars again?" in a half-joking, half-annoyed tone, while she answered work emails. David seemed surprised by the question. He set his book down. "I don't know," he said, looking into the fire. "It's a community. People post pictures of vintage guitars they find. They argue about which kind of wood creates the warmest tone. They share tabs." He paused, then continued. "You know that Gibson I've always wanted, the cherry red ES-335? Amanda nodded. She'd been hearing about that guitar for a decade. "There's this guy on the forum out in Oregon," David said, his voice becoming animated. "He found a 74 in a pawn shop, just decimated, and he spent 6 months restoring it. He posted pictures of every step, gutting the electronics, sanding the neck. It was incredible, like watching a piece of art get brought back to life." Amanda listened. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't planning tomorrow's dinner. She just listened to him talk about tone woods, wiring, and amplifiers. She realized he knew as much about this stuff as she knew about agile project management. "That sounds really complicated," she said when he'd finished. "I didn't realize so much went into it." "Right?" he said, clearly thrilled to be sharing. "It's both a science and an art." They talked for a little while longer. Amanda asked him about his first guitar. He asked her about the book she was reading. The conversation wasn't deep. They weren't solving the deep-seated mysteries of their marriage. They were just connecting, unmediated. By 9 p.m., the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Amanda yawned, a real bone-tired yawn. "I think I'm going to bed," she said, surprising herself. "It's only 9.
David teased, repeating her own disbelief from the night before. "Oh, shut up," she laughed, throwing a couch pillow at him. "I'm done." She went into the bathroom. As she brushed her teeth, she looked in the foggy mirror. She wasn't wearing any makeup. Her hair was in a messy bun. She was wearing an old Northwestern sweatshirt.
And she looked happy. She went back to the bedroom. David was already there, settled in bed, his book on the nightstand. Amanda climbed under the heavy duvet. The air was cold, but the bed was warm. "Good night, Am," David whispered, turning off the lamp. The room plunged into absolute darkness. The rain had stopped. Now the silence was even deeper. "David?" Amanda said quietly into the dark. "Yeah?" "I'm glad we came," she said, "even if the coffee is terrible." She heard him smile in the dark. "Me too, Am," he said. "Me too." And within 5 minutes, faster than any meditation app or melatonin pill could have managed, they were both asleep. Chapter 6. The Creek Road. No GPS. Amanda woke, this time, to light. A bright, unfiltered strip of sun had found its way through the gap in the bedroom curtains, shining directly on her face. It was warm. It was persistent. She blinked, squinting around the illuminated room. No sound of rain, just the high-pitched trill of birds outside and David's even breathing beside her. She reached, out of habit, for the nightstand. Her fingers found the smooth oak surface, searching for a phone that wasn't there. The familiar itch, the phantom limb, was still there, but it was no longer a clawing panic. It was just an old habit, like cracking a stiff neck. She glanced over. David was still fast asleep. Quietly, she slid out of bed. The floor was cold on her bare feet, but she didn't mind. She padded into the kitchen. The microwave clock read 7:31 a.m., a civilized hour. She started the ritual herself. She got the blue Maxwell House can. She spooned grounds into the French press, no longer shy with the portions. She knew it needed to be strong to be drinkable. She set the kettle to boil. While she waited for the water, she walked to the sliding glass door and pushed it aside. The air rushed in, so crisp and sharp it almost hurt. Last night's rain had scoured the world clean. Everything seemed to be in high definition. The red and gold maple leaves on the trees looked brighter. The lake was a flat sheet of glass, reflecting a deep, cloudless blue sky. The smell of damp earth and wet pine was intense. The kettle clicked off. She made the coffee. As she was pressing the plunger down, David emerged, rubbing his eyes. "God, it's bright," he mumbled. "I know," Amanda said, pouring 2 mugs. "Look at this." She handed him one, and they both stepped out onto the porch. Steam rose from their cups in the cold air. They stood there for a moment, not talking, just sipping the terrible coffee and staring at the view. "Okay," David said, after a few minutes. "This is an insult to the coffee bean. But look at that. It's worth it." "Yeah," Amanda agreed. "It's gorgeous." "So," David said, turning to her, "no excuse to stay inside today. June said we should follow the creek." Amanda looked toward the small creek they could hear gurgling at the edge of the property, where it fed into the lake. Yesterday, the thought of walking into the woods with no GPS, no phone map, would have filled her with anxiety. Today? "We don't have a map," she said, but it wasn't a protest, just a statement of fact. "We have a creek," David replied. "We follow it downstream, then we follow it upstream. Simple, right? Like Hansel and Gretel, but instead of breadcrumbs, we have a river." "I'm not sure that's how that story ends," Amanda laughed. "But okay, I'm in.
I need to move. I can feel my back molding to the shape of that sofa. An hour later, they were ready. It was a comical preparation. They had no real hiking gear. Amanda wore her Lululemon yoga pants, old Nike running shoes, and 3 layers: a t-shirt, a cashmere sweater, and her thin puffer jacket. David wore jeans, his one pair of Merrell hiking shoes, and an old college sweatshirt. Amanda's only project was packing snacks. There were no Cliff Bars. She made 2 peanut butter and blueberry jam sandwiches on the squishy white bread they'd found in the freezer. She wrapped them carefully in foil. She found 2 half-empty water bottles in the car and refilled them from the tap. "This feels like we're going camping in the backyard," David remarked, as Amanda stuffed everything into an old drawstring backpack she had found in the closet. "It's an expedition," Amanda said gravely. "And if we're not back by sundown, send a St. Renard with brandy." They set off. They found the trail, if you could call it that, just to the side of the cabin. It was just a small, barely there path that ran parallel to the gurgling creek. Immediately they were enveloped by the trees. The sun filtered through the dense canopy, creating dappled patches of light on the pine needle-covered ground. For the first 15 minutes, they just concentrated on walking. The trail wasn't flat. It was slippery with wet leaves, rutted with roots and rocks. Amanda, used to the flat sidewalks of Chicago, had to actually focus on where she put her feet.
"Whew," she panted as they had to climb over a large fallen log. "This is definitely not the lakefront trail." "Feel the glutes," David teased from up ahead. The only thing she could hear was the crunch of her own footsteps, David's breathing, and the constant, soothing sound of the creek. Its gurgle was their companion, a constant reminder they were on the right path. As they fell into a rhythm, they started to talk. Not about work, not about bills. "Remember that time we tried to go camping at the Indiana Dunes?" David asked, chuckling. "Right after we got married?" "Oh my God, don't," Amanda groaned. "The tent collapsed, you tried to roast hot dogs on a coat hanger and lit them all on fire, and then a raccoon stole our entire bag of marshmallows." "It was a very large raccoon," David defended. "And I thought it was a pretty romantic night." "We slept in the car," Amanda reminded him. They laughed. It was a memory they hadn't brought up in years. It came naturally, prompted by the smell of the damp earth and this feeling of amateur adventure. They kept walking. Amanda started to notice small things. The way the moss grew thickest on the north side of the trees. A bright, almost neon orange fungus growing out of a rotting log. She stopped to touch a fern, feeling its delicate ribs. Her mind, which usually ran at 100 miles an hour, had slowed down. It was processing real input: colors, textures, smells. "David, stop," she whispered suddenly, grabbing his sleeve. "What, a bear?" he whispered back, looking around frantically. "No, be quiet." They stood still. At first, David heard nothing but the creek. Then he did. Twack, 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 twack. From the other side of the creek, on a dead, silver tree, was a woodpecker. A huge one with a brilliant red crest. It was hammering at the trunk with an incredible speed. They stood there, perfectly still, for 5 minutes, just watching it work. Normally, Amanda would have taken a picture, shot a video, posted it to her Instagram story with the caption, "Sounds of Nature," and then forgotten it. Now she just stood and watched. She seared the image into her brain. The red head against the blue sky. The chips of bark flying. The bird cocked its head, seeming to sense them, and then launched itself into the air with a sharp cry, disappearing. "Wow," David said softly. "That was a pileated woodpecker, the real deal." They walked on, feeling like they'd shared a small secret. An hour after they'd started, the path suddenly opened up. The sound of the creek got louder, turning from a gurgle to a low roar. They stepped out of the trees and stopped dead. It wasn't Niagara, but it was spectacular. The creek spilled over a 15-foot granite cliff into a small, churning, crystal-clear pond. The sun hit the falls directly, creating a small rainbow in the mist. The air was cooler here, and the sound of the roaring water drowned out everything else. To one side, there was a massive, flat rock, perfectly warmed by the sun. "Okay," Amanda said, her voice full of awe. This is where we eat lunch." They scrambled up the rock, shrugging off the backpack. They sat, letting the cool mist hit their faces. The waterfall was too loud to talk over easily. And it was perfect. They unwrapped the foil-covered peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They were slightly squished, but they were the best sandwiches in the world. They ate in silence, staring at the cascading water. A thought flickered through Amanda's mind. It's about 11 a.m. Back in Chicago, it's 10 a.m. My quarterly budget meeting would be starting right now. She pictured the stuffy conference room, the fluorescent lights, the PowerPoint, Patterson rubbing his temples. She looked at the waterfall, and for the first time, she really felt it. Not anxiety, not FOMO. Relief. She wasn't there. She was here. And the world had, in fact, not ended. They sat for a long time after they finished eating, just listening. The roar was like a natural white noise, filling her mind, pushing out all the static. Finally, David tapped her knee. "Come on," he said, his voice raised over the sound. "We should head back before the sun gets too high." The walk back seemed faster. They were more confident. Their legs had found the rhythm. They followed the creek upstream, their faithful companion, leading them home. When the whispering pines came back into view, it looked like a haven. Smoke was still rising in a thin curl from the chimney, from last night's embers. It looked cozy. They tramped inside, cheeks flushed from the cold air, legs pleasantly sore. The clock read 1:30 p.m. "I feel like I just walked 1,000 miles, Amanda said, collapsing onto the sofa. She kicked off her running shoes and groaned with satisfaction as she rubbed her feet. "I think it was about 3, David laughed. "But who's counting?" They were tired. A clean, physical exhaustion that Amanda hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the burnout, mental depletion she felt after 10 hours of staring at a screen. This was a good tired. David got the fire going again, and within minutes, the room was cozy. Amanda lay on the sofa, almost dozing, but then her eyes caught it. On the dining table, it was waiting, the beige chaos of puppies. She smiled. "All right," she said, pushing herself up with effort. "I'm going to make some tea." She couldn't face the coffee again. "And then you and me. We are finishing that third dog's ear." Chapter 7. The Storm and the Candlelight. Amanda found a box of English breakfast tea in the cabinet, and while the kettle boiled, she leaned against the counter, massaging her aching calves. It was a good ache, a physical reminder of the waterfall and the trail. It was nothing like the dull, tense pain in her neck and shoulders she usually brought home from work. David had rebuilt the fire, and it was now burning steadily, throwing off a consistent warmth. With 2 steaming mugs of tea, they returned to the dining table and to their nemesis, the beige puppies. "Okay," Amanda said, putting on the reading glasses she normally reserved for Excel sheets. "System. We need a system." "You're starting to sound like a real puzzle addict," David laughed, sipping his tea. "Look," she pointed,
This dog, she tapped the box lid, is facing left. This one is facing right, and this one, she tapped another, is yawning. We can sort the pieces by the direction of the fur. David looked skeptical, but he shrugged. You're the boss. For the next 2 hours, the cabin fell into a focused silence, broken only by muttering. This is a nose. Definitely a nose. No, it's too curved. I think it's a paw pat. I found a whisker piece. Has anyone seen a whisker piece? Fur, a piece with a brown spot? Fur. They were completely lost in it, a 2-person team solving a pointless but deeply important problem. They had finished the 3rd dog, the yawning one, and were arguing over whether the ear they just found belonged to dog 4 or 5 when David noticed it first. Huh, he said, looking up. It's getting dark fast. Amanda looked up from the table. He was right. The brilliant sun of the morning was gone. The sky outside the sliding glass door had turned a deep, bruised gray. The wind, which had been still all day, was beginning to hiss around the corners of the cabin, creating a low whistle. And then the rain started. It wasn't the gentle drizzle from the day before. This was an angry, wind-driven rain. Hard drops began to smack against the glass like little pebbles. Wow, Amanda said, her voice a little nervous. That looks serious. It's fine, David said, turning back to the puzzle. We're inside. We've got a fire and... He held up a piece. I think I just found the tail. He was trying to fit the piece into place when the lights in the cabin flickered once. The light over the stove went dead and then flashed back on. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, then kicked back on with a thunk. They both froze. It's just the wind, David said, his voice artificially casual. Probably a branch brushing a power line somewhere. Amanda said nothing. She listened to the wind hiss, which now sounded like a low growl. And then, without warning, a blinding, blue-white flash of lightning illuminated the entire room for a millisecond, making everything look like an X-ray. Almost instantly, a deafening crack of thunder, a visceral boom, exploded directly over the cabin, shaking the floor beneath their feet. Amanda let out a small scream, and then, click, the lights went out. The small fire in the fireplace was suddenly the only source of light in the room. The hum of the refrigerator died. The exhaust fan in the bathroom stopped. Darkness rushed in. A heavy silence, completely different from the peaceful quiet before, fell over them. This silence was broken only by the howl of the wind and the lash of rain against the windows. For the first second, the day one panic surged back in Amanda, a cold wave of adrenaline. No power, no phones, no internet, a storm, darkness. Oh my God, David, she whispered into the dark. I heard him shift in his chair. It's okay, he said, his voice strained but not panicked. We're fine. The power's just out. The power's out, Amanda repeated, the words sounding terrifying. What are we going to do? She waited for him to panic. She waited for herself to panic, but it didn't happen. Instead of freezing, Amanda's project manager brain kicked in, not about emails, but about basic needs. Problem? Darkness and no power. Resources. What's in the cabin? Objective? Light and heat. Okay, Amanda said, her voice surprisingly firm. She pushed her chair back. Okay. David, in the kitchen drawer, the one right of the sink, I think I saw a flashlight. On it, his voice came from the dark. She heard the rattle of metal. Got it. Yes, it works. A weak yellow beam cut across the room, finding Amanda's face. She squinted. Good, she said. Now candles, in the pantry next to the cereal. Give me the light. She went to the kitchen and, with the help of the flashlight, found a box of emergency white candles and a book of matches. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she got the box open. She went back to the living room. Put them on the coffee table, and one here, on the counter. David tended to the fireplace. The embers were still hot, and with some newspaper and kindling, he quickly coaxed the fire back to life. It flared up, casting a warm, dancing orange glow across the room, chasing away the frightening shadows.
5 minutes later, the cabin was transformed. It was no longer dark and scary. It was lit by 3 candles on the coffee table, one on the kitchen counter, and the bright, living glow of the fire. The warm, flickering light made the room feel even cozier than before. Outside, the storm still raged. The wind still howled, but it felt more like a soundtrack now than a threat. Amanda and David stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking around. "Well," David said, breaking the silence, "it's very Little House on the Prairie." Amanda laughed, a short, slightly tense sound. "As long as there's no scarlet fever." She felt the adrenaline recede, leaving a strange calm. They had faced a crisis, a real, tangible one, and they had handled it, together, without panicking. The puzzle on the dining table was forgotten. "I think," Amanda said, walking toward the fire, "it's time for something stronger than tea." She went back to the kitchen, and by the light of the single candle, found the Merlot bottle they'd opened the first night, still half full. She poured 2 generous glasses, the candlelight making the wine glitter like rubies. She handed one to David. "Cheers," she said. "What are we toasting?" he asked, clinking his glass to hers. "Survival?" "To not being completely useless idiots," she smiled. They didn't go back to the armchair or the sofa. Instead, they pulled the old Persian rug closer to the hearth and sat on the floor, leaning back against the couch just as they had with the grilled cheese. They sat, sipping their wine and listening to the storm. The firelight cast their shadows, large and flickering on the wall. "You know," Amanda said, after a long time, her voice thoughtful, "Day 1, if this had happened, I think I would have lost my mind. I would have cried. I would have demanded we leave immediately. I wouldn't have been calm either. I'd be running around, trying to get a signal, swearing at that dead router. But now," Amanda looked around the candlelit room, "it's almost peaceful." "It's very peaceful," David agreed. He set his wineglass down and put an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat there, leaning against each other, in the warmth of the fire. They didn't speak again for a long time. There was no need. Outside, the thunder rumbled, moving farther away. The storm was passing. The rain softened to a steady, soothing rhythm on the roof. They had weathered the storm, both of them. Chapter 8. The Call. Amanda woke up because she was cold. It was the first thing she noticed. The warmth from the fireplace had died in the night, and with no central heat, no power, the October chill had seeped into the cabin. She opened her eyes. The room was cast in a quiet, gray morning light. The storm was gone. The rain had stopped. There was only silence. David was already out of bed. She could hear him rattling around in the living room. She rolled out from under the heavy duvet and hurried to pull on a pair of wool socks. The air was freezing. Her breath plumed in a small, misty cloud. She walked into the living room. David was kneeling in front of the fireplace, carefully rebuilding the fire. He'd brought more wood in from the porch and was trying to coax the last few embers from last night back to life. "Morning," he said, not looking up. "Should have taken shifts to keep the fire going." "Morning," she replied, pulling her sweater tightly around herself. "What are you doing?" "Science experiment," he muttered. "No power, no electric kettle, no stove. But," he pointed to a medium-sized metal pot, usually for pasta, that he'd found.
We have fire and we have water. I'm making cowboy coffee." Amanda looked at him, hair sticking up, a smudge of soot on his face, trying to balance the pot on the fireplace's old grate. A sudden warm wave of affection washed over her, chasing away the cold. "You're my hero," she said. While David wrestled with the fire, Amanda went to the bathroom. The tap water was ice cold, but she splashed it on her face, feeling instantly awake. When she returned, David had succeeded. The water in the pot was steaming, and he had just dumped the Maxwell house grounds directly into it. "We'll let it settle," he announced proudly. They poured the gritty, smoky concoction into mugs. It was even worse than the French press version. It tasted like ash and desperation. But it was hot, and it was caffeine. They stood by the fire, warming their hands and sipping, feeling like true pioneers.
They were halfway through their mugs when the reality of the situation hit Amanda. It wasn't a wave of panic, but a cold, sharp stab. "David," she said, her voice suddenly serious, "what day is it?" David frowned. We got here Monday night. Yesterday was Tuesday, so it's Wednesday." Amanda set her mug down on the hearth with a clack. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." "What? What's wrong?" "It's Wednesday," she repeated, looking at him with wide eyes. I promised Emily I would call her tonight to see how her econ midterm went. I promised." The silence in the room was absolute. This wasn't Patterson. This wasn't a contract. "She'll worry," she said, her voice starting to tremble. "She'll call us. It'll go straight to voicemail. She'll think we've been in an accident. She'll call the police. Oh God, David!" Hey, David said, stepping forward, gripping her shoulders. "Calm down. She's not going to call the police right away. She'll probably just think we forgot." "I never forget. That's the point. I never forget, especially not now." She started to pace, the morning's coziness gone. "We have to call her. We have to find a phone." "Okay," David said, immediately, no argument. He understood. This wasn't tech addiction. This was motherhood. "What's the plan?" "June, her store. That rotary phone. It's on an old line. It'll work." "But the storm." David looked out the window. "I don't care," Amanda said, already pulling on her shoes. "I don't care if there are trees down. We have to get there." "I'll get the keys," David said simply. The drive to June's was completely different from the last two. The dirt road had turned into a mud pit. David had to carefully navigate the Audi through huge chocolate-colored puddles and swerve around fallen branches. The world looked scoured clean, but battered. A large tree was down, thankfully fallen into the woods and not across the road. The air was still heavy and damp. A man sat in silence the whole way, her hands clenched in her lap. She was running scenarios. She'll be fine. She won't call the cops. She'll just text her friends. But what if she calls my mother? Mom will have a heart attack. 15 agonizingly long minutes later, they pulled up to the crossroads. June's general store was still standing, looking completely unfazed. And there was a new sound in the air, the low, steady thrum, thrum, thrum of a generator behind the building.
The lights inside the store were on. David parked. Amanda was out of the car before he'd even turned off the engine. She pushed the door, the brass bell jangling. June was behind the counter, as always. She was reading a different book, and next to her was a small, steaming coffee pot, plugged into an extension cord that seemed to run from the generator. "Mornin'," June said, looking up over her glasses. "You two look like you've seen a ghost." "The power!" Amanda panted, pointing at the light bulb. "You have power?" "Got a generator," June said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Can't let the bait spoil. The trout would never forgive me. June, Amanda said, walking straight to the counter. I know you said no long distance, but this is an emergency, a real one. It's my daughter. I have to call her. I'll pay you whatever it costs. I can use my credit card. June held up one hand. She looked at Amanda for a long moment. She saw the real panic, not the Wi-Fi irritation. This was mother panic. She in Chicago? June stated, not a question. Yes, Amanda said, surprised. How did you know? Area code on your license plate, June said. All right, go ahead. She pointed to the beige rotary phone. But you said, don't make me regret it. June cut her off. She pulled a slip of paper and a pencil from under the counter. Write down your number and her name in case you get cut off. Amanda scribbled it down, her hand shaking. Now then, June said, picking up the receiver. She dialed a series of numbers. Yeah, Al. Get me the long-distance operator. She waited a beat. Yes, I want to place a call to Chicago. She read off Amanda's number. Yep, collect. I'll hold. June handed the receiver to Amanda. It'll ring. Amanda pressed the cold plastic receiver to her ear. She heard the beeps and boops of the line. David stood right beside her, one hand on her back.
And then it rang. Once, twice. Hello? It was Emily's voice. Sleepy, but it was her. Emily, honey, it's me, Amanda nearly shouted. Mom? Oh, hey. What's up? You sound weird. I'm on a landline. Are you okay? How was the midterm? I'm sorry, my phone and Dad's died. We're in a storm. Whoa, chill, Mom, Emily giggled on the other end. I'm fine. The test? I think I did okay. A solid B at least. What's up? Is it Wednesday? Oh, it is. Amanda froze. You weren't worried? I promised I'd call. Oh, Emily said, and Amanda could just picture her shrugging. I knew you were in the woods. I figured the signal sucked. Mom, I was just about to grab breakfast with Sarah. Is everything okay? Amanda looked at David. He was watching her with a small smile. She wasn't panicking. She hadn't called the police. She hadn't even remembered it was Wednesday. She was living her life. Everything's fine, baby, Amanda said, her voice suddenly light. Everything is perfectly fine. I just wanted to hear your voice. Aw, cool. Love you too. Is Dad there? He's right here. Amanda passed the phone to David. Hey, Pumpkin. Sounds like you're crushing it. Make good choices. Amanda stepped back from the counter. She felt like she'd just run a marathon. She leaned against a rack of potato chips, breathing deeply. She had been braced for a crisis, but there was no crisis. A few minutes later, David hung up. She loves us, he said to Amanda, his voice cheerful. Yeah, Amanda said, a shaky smile forming. She's okay. June, who had been pretending to wipe down the bait fridge, came back to the counter. She didn't say anything. She just reached under the counter for 2 styrofoam cups. She went to her coffee pot, but then paused. Instead, she reached for a canister of Swiss Miss cocoa. She spooned 2 heaping mounds of powder into each cup, then poured hot water from her generator-run kettle. She slid the 2 cups across the counter toward them. This, June said, is on the house. Amanda picked up the warm cup. The sweet smell of chocolate rose up. June, she said, her voice thick, thank you. June looked at her, her eyes sharp over her glasses. Sometimes, June said, just loud enough for them to hear, We worry so much about the connections we lost, we forget the ones standing right next to us. She nodded toward David. Amanda looked at David, who was smiling at her over his own cocoa. She nodded. "Thank you, June," she repeated, and this time she meant it for everything.
They drove back to the cabin in silence, sipping the hot, sweet cocoa. The thrum of June's generator faded behind them. When they turned onto the dirt road to the cabin, Amanda didn't feel anxious anymore. She felt light, as if an invisible, tightly wound string she'd been carrying for 3 days, no, for 6 weeks, ever since Emily left, had finally been cut. They got back to the cabin. It was still cold, still without power, but this time it felt well and truly like home. Chapter 9. The Last Puppy. When they got back to the Whispering Pines, their Audi was the only thing making a sound, its tires whispering on the damp dirt road. They parked. David killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, but this time it wasn't scary. It wasn't the silence of isolation. It was the silence of privacy. The cabin was just as cold, dark, and quiet as they'd left it, but their attitude toward it had completely changed. It wasn't a cage anymore. It was a cocoon. "All right," David said, his voice cheerful. "I'm going to make this place feel like a finished sauna." "And I," Amanda said, looking toward the dining table with a smile, "am going to solve the beige fur problem." No more panic, no more confusion, just tasks. Within 15 minutes, David had proven himself a master fire builder. He'd learned how the flue needed air, and soon a huge, confident fire was crackling in the hearth, chasing away the morning chill.
Amanda, meanwhile, returned to the dining table. She no longer saw a mess. She saw a plan. "David," she called out, as he was brushing soot off his hands, "look, I figured it out. The pattern on the wicker basket. It repeats every 5 rows. We don't have to guess. We just have to find the repeating pattern pieces." David came over, looking over her shoulder. "My God," he laughed, "you've project managed the puzzle." "Shut up and find me all the pieces with a left-facing diagonal," she instructed. They worked. The afternoon passed in a quiet, almost hypnotic rhythm. They didn't talk much, but the silence was companionable. Every so often, one of them would murmur, "Found an ear. This is definitely an eye. No, that's from dog number 5. Number 4 has the white spot." Outside, the sun came out, drying up the post-storm puddles. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming their backs as they hunched over the table. They ate the rest of the bread and peanut butter for lunch, standing at the table, unwilling to break their flow. By about 4 p.m., they were close. All that was left was a solid patch of beige in the upper right corner. No pattern, no features, just fur. "This is hell," Amanda muttered, trying to fit a piece into a gap. "It won't go." "You're forcing it," David said. "Try turning it 180 degrees. She turned it. Click. "Oh!" she breathed, almost surprised. They kept going. Faster now. A final sprint. 10 pieces left. 5. I think this one," David said, holding up a strangely shaped piece. "This is the last one." He looked at Amanda. She nodded. She pointed to the single remaining gap, a hole right in the middle of the 7th puppy's forehead. David carefully placed the piece. Click! It fit perfectly. They stood still. They both stepped back. It was done. 1,000 pieces. A sea of beige. 7 goofy puppies. It was the ugliest, cheesiest puzzle Amanda had ever seen. And it was magnificent. They stood there, admiring their work. A deep, tangible sense of accomplishment filled the room, a satisfaction that no "great job" email could ever provide. "We did it," David said quietly. "We did it," Amanda repeated. And at that exact moment,
as if the universe had been waiting for this precise second of completion. Beep! The garish artificial sound made them both jump. The clock on the microwave flared to life, flashing 12, 12, 12. A low hum started up as the refrigerator kicked on. And then the overhead light in the kitchen, the one they hadn't even realized they hated, flickered on, casting a harsh fluorescent white light into their cozy sanctuary. The power was back. A year ago, no, 4 days ago, this would have been a moment of joy. They would have cheered. Amanda would have lunged for their dead phones, plugging them in, waiting for the flood of notifications. But now, they just stood there, squinting against the sudden light. The silence of the cabin had been broken, not by the storm, but by the hum of civilization. They looked at each other in the artificial light. And then, David smiled. "Well," he said, "good. Now we can make decent coffee tomorrow morning." Amanda blinked. She walked over to the light switch on the wall. "Turn the stupid light off," she muttered, flipping the switch. The fluorescent glow died. The room instantly returned to its cozy, firelit, late afternoon glow. "That's much better," she said. The phones still sat there, useless bricks by the counter. They had been dead for days. Amanda looked at them for a second. The itch to charge them, to connect, was there. But it wasn't a command anymore. It was a choice. And she chose not to. Not yet. "You know," she said, walking back to the table. She looked at the finished puzzle, now bathing in the firelight. "We should leave it for the next people." "Good idea," David said. He walked to the bookshelf. "And I think," he pulled out the John Grisham, "we still have a few hours before dinner. I want to see if Julia Roberts was right." Amanda smiled. "Me too. I think the butler is about to crack." She picked up her paperback. David tossed another log on the fire. And as their last evening at the Whispering Pines settled in, they didn't celebrate the return of the power. They ignored it. They went back to the sofa, by candlelight and firelight, and they began to read.
This is, of course, the last chapter of the story. The signal bar. The jarring beep, beep, beep of the digital alarm clock by the bed woke Amanda. 7 a.m. She groaned and slapped her hand down on the off button. The room fell quiet again, but the silence was broken. The light from the clock display glowed an artificial red in the pre-dawn gloom. "I hate that sound," she mumbled. Beside her, David was stirring. "Me too," he said. "I like the woodpecker better." They lay still for a moment, reluctant to leave the warm cocoon of the duvet. But today was the day they had to leave. A sense of heaviness, a slight sadness settled over them both. This cabin, which had been their prison, had become their sanctuary. 45 minutes later, David was in the kitchen with a look of pure contentment. The only sound was the low whir of the coffee grinder. They had found an unopened bag of good whole bean coffee in the back of the pantry, and the steady drip, drip, drip of the automatic coffee maker. The whole cabin was warm. The lights were on. Hot water ran from the tap. All the 21st century comforts were back. "Do you smell that?" David said, taking a deep breath. "That is not ash. That is Arabica." He poured 2 mugs of dark, rich, fragrant coffee. Amanda took hers, the heat warming her hands. She took a sip. "Oh my God, that's so good."
They drank their coffee by the fireplace, which was now cold. It was strange to sit there without the dancing flames. "It's not the same," Amanda said quietly, looking at the cold, black hollow. "No," David agreed, "but we have to pack." They spent the next hour returning the cabin to its original state. David cleaned out the fireplace. Amanda wiped the counters and made the bed. They worked together proficiently, in sync, a dance they had practiced all week. They left the finished puzzle on the dining table, a cardboard monument to their lost or found hours. Before leaving, Amanda paused by the leather welcome binder. She flipped to a blank page at the back. She found a ballpoint pen in her purse. She paused for a second, then wrote, "Thank you for the disconnect. We forgot how much we needed it. P.S. We finished the puppies. Good luck to the next person. A and D, Chicago." She closed the binder. David had already loaded the luggage into the car. They did one last walk-through. The cabin was empty and quiet, as if holding its breath for the next guests.
They shut and locked the door. The morning air was crisp, but Amanda could smell the faint scent of their own car's exhaust, a smell she hadn't noticed for 4 days. They drove away. Amanda took one last look back as the whispering pines disappeared behind a stand of trees. As a ritual, they stopped at June's general store. David needed some gas for the long drive back. The brass bell jingled a final time as they walked in. June was behind the counter, exactly as they had first seen her. The hum of the bait fridge and the smell of cheap canned coffee were the same. "Good morning," David said, placing a large jar of the blueberry jam, the one they'd used for the sandwiches, on the counter. "And a fill-up for the gray Audi, please?" June nodded. "Heading back to the real world?" she asked, her voice dry. "Looks that way," Amanda said, smiling. She felt no need to say more. June looked at her over her glasses. "You two look better," she observed. "Don't have that first-day look anymore." "We have you to thank for that," Amanda said. June just snorted, as if she didn't believe in compliments. She rang up the jam. "Drive safe. Hear the highway's going to be busy." They left the store, and as they drove away, Amanda watched June through the window. She was already back to her book, a steadfast guardian of a slower world. They drove off the last dirt road and turned onto the 2-lane asphalt, heading for the highway. The Audi was quiet. They had plugged both dead phones into the car's charging ports. They had been lying there, dormant, for the last 15 minutes. "Well," David said, picking up speed, "I guess—" Just then, they crested a small hill, crossing the invisible boundary of the digital sanctuary. Beep, 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 buzz, vibrate. Whoosh, 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 buzz, buzz. Both phones exploded into life at the same instant. Their screens lit up. A storm of notifications hit them, a relentless, non-stop barrage. The beeps, whooshes, and vibrations of the emails, text messages, social media alerts, breaking news, and weather warnings they had missed. It was an auditory assault. Amanda, on instinct, reached for her phone. David glanced down at his own, manically flashing screen. The world was screaming for their attention. The familiar itch hit Amanda, the addiction, the urge to know. What did Patterson say? Did Emily text? How was the stock market? She unlocked her phone. Her screen was a sea of red icons. 112 unread emails, 48 WhatsApp messages from various groups, 19 Instagram notifications. She stared at it. The digital chaos. It looked ugly. She looked up. David was frowning at the road, but she could see his hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting the same urge. They looked at each other, in the middle of the frantic beeping of the phones. Neither said a word. David took a deep breath. He reached over, not for his phone, but for the volume knob on the car's console. Mute. The sudden silence rushed back in. Then he reached over, took Amanda's phone from her hand. He didn't look at it. He simply turned it face down in the cup holder. He did the same with his own. "First," David said, his voice calm and clear in the quiet of the car, "let's talk about where we're going to get lunch." Amanda looked at him. She looked at the Dart phones, then she looked out the window, at the highway stretching out before them. She smiled, a real relieved smile. "I'm thinking an old-school diner," she said. "Someplace with good pie." "Sounds perfect," David said, and he reached over and took her hand. 1 week later, Sunday night, at their home in the Chicago suburbs. The house is quiet. David is in the kitchen, but he's not scrolling the news on his laptop. Amanda is in the living room, but she's not catching up on work for the week. David walks into the living room, holding 2 mugs of tea. He sets them on the coffee table. "Ready?" he asks. "Ready," Amanda replies. She reaches for a worn-out box from the bookshelf, not an iPad. She opens the box and spills the wooden tiles onto the table. "You go first," David says, pushing the velvet bag toward her. "But I'm warning you, tonight, Zepp is definitely a word."
And so Amanda and David's story continues, just as all of ours do. A series of busy days interrupted by the moments of connection we are lucky enough to find, or sometimes are forced to find. They will still forget to turn off their phones. They will still work too hard. But now they know the way back to each other. They have heard the whispering of the pines. Thank you for spending your valuable time visiting the Whispering Pines. Hopefully, even for just a little while, you felt the warmth from the fireplace, heard the rain on the roof, and found joy in a beige puzzle piece. The world outside is loud and demanding, but perhaps somewhere in your own home, you can find your own cabin, even if it's just a comfortable armchair, a hot cup of tea, or the hour before bed without a screen. Perhaps it's time now. Put this story down. Listen to the quiet in your own room. Good night, and may your dreams be peaceful and uninterrupted.